soul inside. This morning this man can hide. These forces that keep us tied is hoping we choke and die, yeah. Ain't rocking the tie, ain't going to work. Stuck in the cubicle doing that stupid shit like a jerk. Know what I'm doing ain't perfect, I still make it work. Raising my kids, facing the shit, you know where my words go.
It seems like every time I get on, I fall off track. Gotta get back up, life cuts no slack. Sometimes you gotta jump up, be on the attack. Cause if you don't stand up, then there is no pushback. You better watch how you act. A lot of men are bitching, you might get slacked. And that's embarrassing shit, fam. 5 heads caught it, now it's posted on Instagram. You got religious as pig hand, but still go off on some goddamn. Now everybody deplore us, yet still ain't figured out that they all funded by Soros. You virtual signal your morals, and love to get authority involved in your quarrels. And if I ain't offend you with one of these quotes, you wrote it on yourself, only dope dropped the vote. For real. Stop consenting to the system, then blaming victim, you bomber glad body boy. Hear this, Phil G seeks one, come correct, that is high.
Let's get it on. 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 We're gifted and we're going far. Let's get it on. Going far.
They give us politicians to vote for. And sure enough, the public fall in line when the drums start beating. Left or right, left or right, left or right. The two wings, the two parties are attached to the same bird. The body of the bird is hidden behind a shield, so you don't see what comprises it. And I'll always give you some guy who will say the right things. That's all they have to do, is to say the right things, because they have the pulse on the public. They know what's bothering you, what you're bitching about. And they'll come out and all say the right things, and you never learn. When you get them in, you see them go in a completely different direction, and you say, who is this guy? Well, that's a good question, actually. You should ask that to begin with. Ask, who is this guy? Because not the PR spin from the media is going to help you. The fiction they create about them. And you know they're going to lie to you. So why bother voting? This agenda has steamrolled along since before I was born. Regardless of the parties that were in power in any country, every country has gone along, signing more and more agreements at the same time every year towards this one global agenda. And it's not a happy little farm we'll have, it's a global plantation. And guess who will be the workers? Please don't fall into the hype of voting for people you don't know, for people who already have sworn oaths to organizations that are mandated to go along with globalism and push it. But some of you just can't get enough lies, can you?
So, Larkin, why don't you tell us, how is voting an act of aggression, and how does someone who votes condone violence against his neighbors?
Well, this is one of the weirder things about the belief in government and authority, because it's one of those things that people, they don't know and they totally do know. And here's why I say that. If you go up to somebody and you say, you just voted for that guy, you're condoning violence against me. They say, what are you talking about? No, I just I just voted. I didn't attack you. I didn't do anything. But if you walk them through it, there's no part of the chain of what actually happens that they're unaware of. You say, okay, you vote for that guy. What's your goal? Well, to have him get into office. Okay, then what does he do? Well, he enacts laws. Okay, these laws, are they polite suggestions? Is he going to give me some helpful advice, like eat lots of wheat, give me colon cancer? Well, no, he's not just giving you advice. They're laws. You have to obey the laws. Okay, or else what? Or else consequences. Like what? Like you get put in prison or you get fined. Okay, so you're electing a guy who you know is going to get up there and he's going to use power over me to force me to do what he thinks I should do and to force me to give him my money and hurt me if I don't. And it's one of those things that if you put it literally, it makes everybody uncomfortable, even though they know every bit of it. It's not like they say, oh gosh, I didn't know they imprison people who don't pay. Everybody knows they do. So, like I said, they totally know that there's violence behind it all, but they go into this weird intentional blindness to pretend that voting is some, this is my voice and how we work together as a people. No, it's how you violently impose your agenda on me by way of a third party. And when you put it that way, almost everybody gets uncomfortable because they don't. It's a good sign. It's a good sign that they get uncomfortable because they don't want to admit that they're advocating violence because in most cases they know that's bad. But if you walk them through it, they know that that's the end result. You vote for somebody, you're putting someone in a position of power who's going to violently impose his agenda, his beliefs, his values, his ideas on millions of human beings. And that's not okay, as much as we're taught all the happy garbage about how great democracy is. No, it isn't. It's fighting over what the guy with the club is going to do with it, who he's going to hit and why. That's not noble or civilized. It's violent thuggery. So that's my relatively short answer.
What is the double standards to use violence in people who believe in government?
Well, yeah, these people would never do it. The vast majority of people who vote for somebody to steal my money under threat of hurting me for, whatever. Pay for the war machine, pay for welfare state, pay for schools, pay for whatever they hope the government's going to pay for. If I say, well, tell you what, how about if we just skip the middleman, we do this openly and honestly, you come to my house with a gun, you point it at me, you tell me how much money to give you, and I give it to you. So, we can do away with the game and the joke and the facade that this is legitimate and somehow nonviolent and peaceful. Just do it directly. And everybody says, no, I would never do that. Well, then why would you vote for somebody else to do it? Which is what they all do. And they really, even in their own heads, they don't grasp that basically the exact same act is the exact same act. If you rob me yourself at gunpoint, or you have somebody else rob me at gunpoint, or you vote for somebody else to rob me, it's the same thing. But people are taught to believe that this thing called government and authority, that they have the right to do this to people. So they don't perceive it as, they don't even perceive it as violence, because they think, well, that's law, that's tax collection, and it's necessary, and of course we have to have that. And they have all these excuses they've been taught where that leads them to see something that in any other situation they would know it's immoral, it's evil, it's uncivilized, it's horribly destructive. But in the context of government, they suddenly think it's okay and good and necessary and a great thing to do. And they're wrong.
See, I got this problem. Cops don't like me. So I don't like cops. Okay, fun zone.
Hey, Lark and Rose here. Time for the Daily Rant. Thought I would just start randomly rambling based on a topic that just came to mind and see if it turns into a whole coherent rant, or if it's just random incoherent rambling. wanted to talk about the mentality of police. And I've talked before about how the mythology we see in TV shows and on movies is that law enforcement is out there fighting the bad guys and protecting the innocent and yada, yada, yada. Because a TV show about what cops actually did would be infuriating and boring, which is they drive around looking for reasons to steal money from people. Haha, you have a sticker that doesn't have the right number on it. I'm going to steal some money. Ah, you were driving not quite the right way or not quite the right speed or something, and whether or not you were actually endangering anybody, if you violated any of these arbitrary decrees, then we're going to stop you and steal some of your money. And that would make a really boring show. Now, I admit, back when I was a statist, I liked watching the show Cops because it was sort of interesting. And of course, that's like the highlights of or I don't know if it counts as highlights, but like interesting stuff happening, which is usually people being idiots and the cops show up. And for those of you who ever watched Cops, and you may not remember the specifics, but how often did you actually see them rushing to some dangerous situation and saving the day? I don't remember that ever happening. I mean, we got a call of a domestic disturbance and they're going there and some butthead husband is yelling at his wife and the cops show up and they take him away maybe, or maybe they don't or whatever. But in that real life version where they show, I'm sure there's lots of stuff they don't show because the police say, yeah, don't show that part. But what they choose to show isn't them coming to the rescue and saving the day in the nick of time, like it always is in TV shows and movies. In the actual reality shows that show cops doing stuff, it isn't that. It's just they sort of show up and there's a call of this and they fill out a report, or there's some disturbance and or there's some complaint of somebody staggering around the neighborhood nude or something. It's the highlights that the cops are able to show doesn't even include them running to the rescue and having a scary shootout and saving the day and getting the bad guy. It just, even in the parts they want to brag about, there isn't that. And so there's a lot about, it's one of those things where if people just use their own personal experience, it may not be scientific, it may not be anecdotal, it may just be anecdotal, but still, if you look at your own experience of cops, which have you seen more of? Them showing up to save the day and stop the bad guy, which so far almost everybody I know has seen that never, or them randomly stopping people and ticketing people for whatever they can think of. And it's obviously the latter because that's what they actually do. Wouldn't make a very exciting TV show. Now I'm going to eat donuts for an hour. Now I'm going to drive around doing nothing. Now I'm going to say, hey, that guy doesn't have the right sticker on his car. I'm going to pull him over and do my piggy swagger up to his door. And then, I pulled you over. And then I'm going to write some words on a piece of paper and steal a bunch of money from him for my political masters. Yay, it would be the most boring, infuriating show in the world. But there's more to it that people see in their everyday lives and just sort of don't really add it up. Unless you're in the middle of nowhere, and if you're in the middle of nowhere, lucky you. If you're anywhere else, you see the jackboots driving around all over the place. And I didn't even think about this much until recently when it occurred to me, why do they do that? Why are they constantly driving around? How often do they just happen to be in the right place and some crime is happening and happen to be there to see it, and the criminals are so dumb that they do it in front of a marked police car, and luckily the cops happen to be there right then. So why are they driving around? What's the point? What are the odds? Just statistically, if nasty criminal things are happening at random places on the map, if you're a cop and you're sitting in one place, statistically, you're just as likely to be close to whatever the bad thing is that happens just sitting there than you are driving around all freaking day. And so what's the point of using gas and getting in people's way and you can say, well, it's to show a police presence, but crime still happens. I don't really buy that. And it might have some deterrent effect if they were just freaking everywhere, but that costs $1 million. But they just drive around. It's not like they're driving around finding people committing crimes, like in the act, unless you count random things that they're looking for to rob people for where no one's actually getting hurt, which is what they're actually doing. And they drive around all over the place. And you see them with somebody pulled over by the side of the road. You know dang well they were just fishing for some, you did a turn, you turned on red when the sign said no turn on red, so give us a bunch of money. And you were driving faster than the sign said you should, so give us a bunch of money. You didn't have the right sticker on your license plate, so give us a bunch of money. You didn't have the right inspection sticker, so give us a bunch of money. Your tail light is broken, so give us a bunch of money. Like, that's what they're driving around looking for, is excuses to rob people. And, the stories come out that, they're doing quotas, and everybody's shocked, except anybody who knows anything about the police. Of course they're doing quotas. They're tax collectors. That's what they do. Police are almost entirely, patrol is almost entirely tax collectors. They're fishing for reasons to take your money as you're driving down the road. And just the fact that they drive around all day, what's the point of that? If you had, you have a neighborhood and you have private security, and, if you wanted to hire them to walk around all day to look big and bad so people go, there's a big and bad guy walking around, you could. Seems kind of silly. To me, it would be just as useful and way less expensive to just have somebody I can call who, maybe he lives kind of in the middle-ish part of town. And if he's out patrolling and I call him, he might be closer to me or he might be farther away. It doesn't actually help me at all to have him be randomly roaming around. It just uses up gas and wears out vehicles and means you have to pay somebody for doing something that's accomplishing nothing, driving around in circles. That reminds me, once upon a time, my wife and I used to do Town Watch, where we would drive around looking at things, and we never actually saw anything happening or anything worth reporting or any of that. But if you have, you have normal people who just live there who have their eyes out for bad stuff happening, they're a billion times more likely to notice if something bad is actually happening. And all the times we did it, which I don't remember how many times that was, we didn't do it very often, but we never saw anything going on. We just sort of drove around and kept an eye on things and who cares. Incidentally, if we had seen some quote-unquote crime that had no victim, a victimless crime, we wouldn't have reported it anyway. If we saw somebody actually breaking into somebody's house, I probably still wouldn't have reported it. I would have went and stopped the person. And I carried a firearm when I did that, which I think they kind of tell you not to. No, leave it to the authorities because they can reliably kill innocent people all over the place, so let them do it. But so I was armed and I had a carry permit and everything, but never needed it. Nothing ever happened. But and after a while we started to think this is totally pointless. We never see anything. And if any criminal is gonna break in, is he dumb enough to do it in front of a car that's driving right past him? Because it's not like we were hiding in wait or something or spying on houses. We were just driving around. So it'd have to mean some criminal is dumb enough to do some bad thing in front of traffic. Which, if that's going to happen, why doesn't the person who's already there just call in or, either do something about it themselves or call private badass guy who will come running and do something about it. So we quickly became of the attitude that this is kind of pointless. If you just live where you are and everybody pays attention and see something, say something. If you see something that's obviously actually bad, then see something, say something makes a little bit of sense. If you go, oh my gosh, that guy has a backpack, quick, call SWAT, then you're just a paranoid idiot. But the whole police presence thing, and that's a funny thing is, I mentioned before that I learned that a place where my parents owned a cabin and some property in the woods, and we didn't know for years and years and years until there was a news story about, there was a couple break-ins in that area, And the crime rate out there is like almost nothing. But there were a couple break-ins, and then there was a news story about, oh my gosh, who was this? What happened? And they stopped. I don't think anybody ever caught anybody, but they just stopped. I guess whoever was doing it figured, all right, we pushed our luck enough, let's go somewhere else. But in the story, being status that they are, the newspaper said, so now do you want a local police force? And my response was, what? Really? That town doesn't have a local police force and never did. Like, there are the state troopers. You can call the state troopers if you want and wait probably 45 minutes. And a guy in the article was saying that. It's like, if you want law enforcement out here, and this isn't middle of freaking nowhere. It's just sort of Pennsylvania suburbia. Well, it's a little more country than suburbia. But it's not total middle of nowhere. But they just decided we don't really want a police force. We don't freaking need it. We don't think it does any good. And it's funny because I have a really low crime rate, and I never noticed the lack of police there, because how often do you notice a lack of something? Like, you don't walk down the street and go, gosh, there are hardly any rhinoceroses around here. Like, you don't notice if they're not there. And then it occurred to me, wow, I've never freaking seen local police out in that town because there aren't any. And it doesn't mean, oh, there's crime everywhere. Like, it means they're not paying for that. And in the story, I think two different homeowners, I think the two homeowners who were robbed even, were asked, so now do you want police? No. Why? So we can be routinely robbed to pay for some stupid jackboot who's never going to get here on time anyway? And, like, in that case, what would the police have done anyway? Like, haha, we showed up 8 hours after the burglary and said, yep, somebody stole your stuff. Now we're going to write this big, long report, and nothing's ever going to happen. Like, wow, that would have been a great improvement over what did happen, which is a couple people got victimized and nobody got physically hurt or anything. So I didn't even notice that, that town is anarchy in the sense, they have a borough and tax collectors and, stupid parasites of their own. Speaking of which, to show the brilliance of bureaucracy, that's the same town where my parents got a letter, and it happened again a few years later, a letter that says, you have to pay us this however many $100 fee for your septic tank, because we decided to tax you for having a septic tank. And my parents said, well, that's all very nice, except we don't freaking have a septic tank. And the brilliant bureaucrats in this little town sent back a thing that says, all right, fill out this form asking for a waiver for this tax for your septic tank. They wrote back and said, we don't need a waiver for our septic tank. We don't freaking have a septic tank. We're not going to pay a tax on something we don't freaking have. And it went back and forth over and over again, and I don't know if they lost interest or what. And then it came up again a few years later, and we had to tell them again, there isn't a septic tank there. We don't have sewage. We don't have running water. We use a composting toilet, which turns it into compost, as in for gardens and stuff. And that's it. There's no output. There's no septic tank. You can't even make a septic tank there because the land's so rocky. And there's no sewage system, and there's no plumbing, there's no running water. It's just a cabin in the woods. So this brilliant bureaucracy kept trying to demand money to pay for something that wasn't there. And then, well, if you fill out this form, we might give you a waiver. I'm not going to fill out a form just to tell you I don't have something that you're trying to tax. So yeah, there is a government in that stupid little town, but there's no local police. Which makes it cheaper. And I never noticed, and apparently people there like it that way. And now there are stories of a town here and there disbanding their entire police force. Say, you guys are like thugs, and you terrorize people, and you scare away tourists, and we can't even really figure out what good you do, so you're all fired. And so they've just dissolved their police departments. And they're like, oh, well, that was cool. Now we don't have to pay for that, and doesn't really seem to make a difference of crime, except the crime committed by the people with badges is down really far because there aren't any anymore. But if you look at what, you look at the mythology of what we're taught, there would be chaos if not for police. And then you look at the reality, which is they hardly ever actually show up in time to stop a crime. They might show up and write a report. And the piggies who drive around all day, they're not the ones who solve crimes anyway. Like, if you report something, they're not going to look into it. They might write a report and say, oh, if somebody sees this car, it's stolen. And the likelihood of them noticing is slim to none. But, you know, there are things that some police do, very few, you know, investigators and detectives, that in a free market, I'm sure there would be that. And there already is that. You know, private investigators, there already is that. Because people want a better job than government does. So they say, hey, somebody stole my car. Here's what I know. I have a couple clues. Do you think you can work on it? And they say, all right, give me a retainer of this much. I'll see what I can find out. And they have to actually please their customers. They can't just say, well, we might look into that someday, which is what happens if you report a crime to the police. You know, if nobody got murdered, they probably don't really care that much. And will do exactly nothing about it, except maybe write it on a piece of paper and put it in a filing cabinet. Wow, that helped a lot. So if you look at what they do, you know, look at what you've actually seen with your own eyes, which is they drive around all over the place, wearing out vehicles, using up gasoline, getting in the way, randomly harassing people, and then robbing people for whatever arbitrary stuff they can think of that happens to violate some random decree. But they don't, like, have you ever seen a cop save the day? And on the rare occasions, like I asked this under a video of my video, Cops Are Cowards. I said, does anyone out there actually have a real life experience they can describe where they saw a cop saving the day? And there's almost none. There were like one and maybe. One real one and a maybe of a cop doing something brave. You know, in the midst of just this avalanche of a million things of cops being stupid, power-happy fascists and making things worse. But in those occasions where like one of them was, look, this cop jumped in the water to save this lady who was in some river. I forget if it was New York or New Jersey or something. She was clinging to something. Cop jumps in the cold water to save her. Yay! And the first thing that occurred to me is he didn't need to be a cop to do that. Like, that isn't even part of his job. Like, what made that awesome is a cop doesn't actually have a legal obligation to do that. Suddenly he went into responsible good guy mode. Well, he didn't need a badge to be responsible good guy mode. You don't need a badge or legislation to have the right to jump in the water and save somebody from drowning. Duh. So in that case, he was a good guy doing a good thing who happened to be a cop at the same time, but being a cop did exactly nothing to help. If anything, it hindered him by putting a big utility belt on him with a bunch of weights on it. Yeah, that's just what I want when I'm jumping in a river. And that was the same thing of this guy. No, wait, that was hysterical. There was one where somebody posted it like, this guy saved people in a burning building. And before reading the story, I was like, well, that's cool. I'm glad. And if somebody who was a cop did that, good for him. Like, I'm not going to say that's not good just because he was a cop, but that has nothing to do with being a cop. Anybody could do that. But then I actually read the freaking story, and the title was like, heroic cops save people from burning building. What they did was stay outside. Like, they went in and said, this is too smoky. They ran back outside. And then their heroics consisted of yelling at people in a second-story window to jump. Here, jump out. That's your awesome heroics, is telling someone to jump out a window. And then they, like, half tried to catch them or something. I don't even know what happened. They weren't at all clear about that. But when someone does do something heroic, like, anybody could have done that. And there are a million stories of people who aren't cops doing heroic things. And again, it doesn't, I won't declare that somebody who does something heroic is bad because he had a badge. Like, if you do something good, you did something good. And then you're probably, if you do have a badge, then the next thing you do is probably drive around and look for excuses to steal people's money. But the idea that the existence of people with badges and special authority actually protects anybody is just mythology. The guys driving around, other than using up resources and getting in the way and intimidating people, they don't even investigate crimes. They drive around and they look for reasons to rob people. They don't stop crimes the chance of them showing up to stop one if you call, or the chances of them happening to stumble on one in progress is like slim to none. Every once in a blue moon, there's like a YouTube video of, and it's usually an off-duty cop, or it can just be a normal person who carries a firearm, of some doofus tries to rob a convenience store, and one of the patrons there, whether he's an off-duty cop or just some guy with a gun, pulls the gun and goes, yeah, you're not gonna do that today. It's like the shortest crime ever, because 5 seconds after it starts, the guy has his hands up and is peeing himself. But none of that requires special authority. So to credit the existence of police with any of this doesn't make any sense. Like, can you point to any scenario in which a good guy saves the day and couldn't have saved the day if he didn't have a badge? And I challenge anyone to even describe a scenario, much less name a real-world example. Like, how would that even happen? Where luckily I had this badge, because otherwise, if I was just a guy, I couldn't possibly have done that good thing to save the day, because I needed my magic badge. And so, yeah, so just sort of keep that in mind when you live your daily life and you're looking around and you're seeing fascists doing what fascists do, and think, how terrifying would things be if every time I saw a fascist, I didn't see a fascist? If they weren't there driving around, if they weren't randomly pulling people over. Yeah, some people would drive without stickers on their cars. To me, that isn't the biggest threat in the universe to humanity and civilization and justice, that somebody might not have a sticker on their car. So, yeah, and again, it may not be hugely scientific. Like, your life experience isn't necessarily a scientific representation of the whole damn world. But at some point, you have to count it for something if all you ever see people with badges doing is harassing people and robbing them for weird reasons, and occasionally showing up to fill out a report after something bad happened and not actually catching bad guys. So, yeah, instead of trying to judge the world by what comes out of your TV set, try judging the world by what goes into your eyeballs from the real world.
And on this slide, you know, there's people who will take offense, and I tell them, as always, get as offended as you want. If you don't think this is what the military is for, this isn't what you think. Any military people who may be listening, or any people who know military people, if this isn't what you think you are the tool for, you're a tool. Okay? And I mean that in the absolute street lingo sense of the word. A tool. Okay? That is just being used by someone else to accomplish their agenda, their goal, their task, that they just don't want to get their hands soiled with. But they're okay with you getting dirty to do it, and being an immoral order follower in order to do it, to go and pillage resources in other countries and, you know, strong-arm the people there to get that done. That's all. You're just an attack dog. And that's what they're all too happy to call you their dogs. That's what these people call you. That's what they call you. They're dogs. They're pets. They're animals. That's my little dog that I keep in the house, and then I put him on a chain and I unleash him when I want to attack somebody. Yeah. And they give you dog tags, and you're too stupid to see the connection. You're too retarded to see the connection. I mean, really, it's like a 2-year-old. That's what these people are. They're like 2-year-olds whose mommy and daddy never paid attention to them. So let me go and join up. Here's my new surrogate family called the military cult. You know, I'm going to go join up and go rape the earth. You know, and then strong arm a bunch of people I never met too while I'm at it. Yeah, that's going to make me feel like a real man. Whatever. It's a bunch of clowns is what it is. A bunch of clowns. These people are. Retarded children who never grew up and don't want to grow up. You know, letting people who hate them and call them, they call you their animals, people. Do I need to say any more than that? They call you dumb, stupid animals. I'm not telling you that from book knowledge or from reading a quote. I'm telling you that from their lips to my ears. Okay? In the room with them, calling you their pets. It's unbelievable. And these people still can't see it. They decorate you with the regalia of an animal, giving you a dog tag, and you wear it as a symbol of pride. Absolute utter fools. Utter fools. And, you know, what we're doing to the earth is just that's the icing on the cake. I mean, and all the other species of animals that live here. You know? We're responsible for the extinction of more other life forms than, you know, than any other species has ever accomplished. Because this whole paradigm of the oil monopolies, of the oil cartels, of this unsustainable paradigm is about taking whatever we want. We're the takers. That's the R complex, the reptile mode. I'm going to take and hoard, you know? And then put myself in a position where nobody can ever break that monopoly. And they can't even see they're a drug addict. They're a drug addict. They're imperialists. The people who are helping them do this are imperialists, creating these false flag events for more justification because the people are tired of these wars. They need to create these justifications to go into these other regions and continue to wage their blood sacrifices called wars. It's a self-imposed noose around the neck, all by a bunch of mental midgets who are trapped in the R complex of the brain and addicted to adrenaline, you know, and think it has to be this way because they have no imagination. And I'll be damned if I'm going to be ruled by people like that, not without a fight, not without consequence. There will be consequence. Trust it. Know it. Know it like you know your name. Not going to go quietly into the night. Not this one. Not this one. And I know there's a lot of people who join me in that sentiment. A lot. A whole lot. And the time's coming. Because we're not doing the great work in enough absolute force. We don't have the force of numbers that we need to accomplish the work. To do this in mind, which is why I keep trying to impress upon people the imperative of the time that we are at. You need to speak this to these people. I was saying the other night when I went on Popeye's show on Truth Frequency last night on Down the Rabbit Hole. I want to start a campaign that is about reaching the military and the police. Because ultimately, if we don't reach these people, there's going to be a absolute bloodbath on the earth. That's what's coming. Okay? We have to reach their mindset to change it. That's what the great work is, folks. If you haven't figured that out yet, you're not paying attention. You're not paying attention if you don't understand that. So I want to do something called cut off the causers. Maybe somebody can come up with an even better name, but you know, just kicking around the idea and discussing it with some people. We need to set, and people think of this, is what I'm about to say the equivalent of guilting someone? Yes. There's a reason that guilt exists. There is a reason that the emotion of guilt exists. It is to be felt. Just like anger, there's a reason for it to exist, and it is to be felt. When something is going wrong, that is something that is unjust, iniquities are taking place around us. Inequities are taking place around us. Injustice is taking place all around us. That's what anger is there for, to be felt in the physiology. So that you will get up off your rear end and get motivated to do something to change that condition. Well, guilt is there for a reason too. It's to make people understand that what they're doing is immoral. And believe me, I felt more than my fair share of it in my life. And that emotion helped me to come out of the dark satanic mindset that I was once in, that these police and military are still in. So I want to set a couple of dates. Like, one date we start, you know, and it's a campaign. We're going to relentlessly hammer on the minds of military and police personnel with information. Their families have to do it. Their friends have to do it. Anybody you know that is connected with these institutions, anybody you know that's in banking, government, finance, military, police, etc. Any control. Just finished going over this idea for sort of a concentrated campaign of sorts to start hammering the truth of natural law into people and get them to understand that what they're doing is wrong and needs to stop. You know, this is what people don't want to hear. They don't want to hear. They want to hear, oh, tell me what I should be doing. No, I'm going to tell you what you should stop doing. That's the solution. The solution lies in the negative pathway. This is what the New Age nonsense troglodytes, you know, don't want you to understand. You know, all the people who have bought the New Age Kool-Aid. You know, they want you to think, oh, it's all about building something new. No, it's called stop doing what you're doing that's immoral, and then the world will change. It won't be enslaved anymore. No one wants to hear that, though. They want to hear some crazy, over-the-top, complicated solution involving, you know, doing all kinds of new things. Well, you know what? That's not the way that the world's going to change. We don't need anything new. We need to stop doing what we're currently doing that we have no right to continue to do. That's the solution. There's the solution, ladies and gentlemen. And no one wants to hear that. You want to know why? It firmly places the responsibility on their shoulders. You're the one who's causing it. By your behavior. And they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear it. No, because it's always somebody else. It's always pointing the finger. You know? So I want to do some kind of a campaign like where we tell the actual causers of the problem, meaning the people who are working in the control-based institutions, that they're the people who are causing slavery on this planet. Over a sustained campaign of like 6 months to a year, and then at the end of that, through the whole time, we're giving them ultimatums. Ultimatums. As your wife, I'm leaving you. If you don't change and stop doing this job within 6 months to a year, I'm out. And I'm going to drag you through the courts and take you for half of everything. Use their system against them. I'm going to sue for full custody of the children so you never see your children again. Because I think you're a psychopathic lunatic that children shouldn't be around. You know? That's how hardcore we need to get. We need to start making these people 100% do what they're doing with no support from us. The idea of supporting these people needs to be withdrawn. Withdrawn. Is that guilting them? Yes, it is. Is that right? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Somebody would have every right to withdraw all interactions with another human being. Disown them as their family member. How about if a mother said to their child who's in the military, I'm not proud of you, you're a disgrace. You're a dog of some psychopathic, lunatic, so-called elitist that thinks of themselves as God of this world. And you're their order-following pet. And I don't want to... You're not my son. How about that? You're disowned. And anything... I'm not leaving you a thing when I'm gone. Not a thing. You're cut off. You're cut out. Cut out of my will of everything. I don't even want to call you son. How about that? You know? See, we need to put pressure. This is what no one wants to hear. Pressure is required to create change. It's not just going to happen willfully. These people are not just going to say, oh my God, I was wrong the whole time. Somebody's going to have to make them see it. And no one wants to hear that. You want to know why? It has nothing to do with New Age garbage. That's why they don't want to hear that. Because it's a full expression of the masculine force of truth.
I should have put you down myself, personally.
You know, I never understood that. Why did you judge me? Why did you judge me?
You killed innocent people.
The means to an end.
You started a massacre.
I caused the revolution.
You betrayed the law.
Law! I betrayed this! Your council's experiment, which failed!
Yeehaw! Larkener is here. Convenient thing about Facebook Live is if I have half a thought, but I don't want to bother writing it out, I can just start randomly ranting at a camera. This thing came up because in my news feed, as I'm scrolling down, and I get 8 billion things in my news feed, some story about a cop, a video surfaces of a cop, punching some teenage girl in the face several times because they're at a party or something, and there's video of it, and of course the cops lied about what happened, and then the video came out, and no, that isn't what happened. So they arrested her for assaulting a public servant or something by apparently hitting him in the fist with her face. But it brought to mind something that is worth a random rant, which is when people see somebody in a uniform, when the average people in status see somebody in a uniform, they sort of think, oh, that's a police officer, instead of that's a person in a costume. And, I've talked about this a million times. Other people have talked about that a million times. But it's like they actually forget that they're people. So these, the people are like, well, I don't necessarily trust strangers, so I want, and they might be armed, they might be scary, they might be unstable, so I'm glad police are around to protect me. Well, the police are strangers too, unless you live in a dinky little town, and they're strangers with guns. And so if you trust them more because they have a badge and a uniform, that's just inherently stupid. Because having a badge and uniform and supposed authority is a huge reason to not trust them. It's basically if you're out, wandering in some city somewhere, and it's late at night and there's a bunch of strangers around. It's like, well, I don't, most of these people are probably perfectly fine and good and stuff, but I don't know, never can tell when one's going to be nasty. And then you see one and realize, oh, okay, the powers that be aren't going to do anything to him if he beats the crap out of me. I feel so good and safe now that he's around. Like, when you see someone with a badge and a uniform, that's when you should be most scared and nervous, because not only are most people going to take his side if he decides to beat the crap out of you, make something up, and then kidnap you, and most people are going to take his word for it, but there is no law that's going to do anything to him if he just outright assaults you. So he's the last one you have any protection from within the supposed system, and if you defend yourself against him, that is the worst possible scenario. Like anybody else, if you have the means to defend yourself, whether with your fists or a gun or whatever, the average thug on the street, like, you might have a chance against. The average cop, good luck, because they have this entire massive gang and massive establishment behind them to A, lie about what happened, and then B, send in lots of people with guns to beat the crap out of you or cage you or prosecute you or anything else. But it's so weird the way people, they express their distrust in humanity, which I can understand that much, but then they follow it up by saying, so it makes me feel better when some of these humans I distrust have lots of firepower, a huge gang behind them, no personal responsibility, permission to treat me like crap, and a gigantic system that isn't going to do anything to them if they commit a crime against me. I feel so safe and secure knowing he's there. It's literally, if I see a cop driving down the street, I'm more worried than if I see, somebody from a street gang walking down the street or driving down the street, Because if I have my gun, well, the street gang guy, he's probably not going to mess with me, unlike the cop. Because they don't just they'll extort people and rob people. They don't nearly rob as many people a day as cops do. You know, cops have a quota. I don't know, do street gangs have quotas of, wait, you only robbed 20 people today? Come on, you're out of our gang. Get out. That's literally what the street gang known as law enforcement does, is there's a certain, and they all pretend not to, and they all totally do it. There's a certain number of people you have to rob this day or week or month or, you know, however they time the quotas. Now you get out there and start robbing the crap out of people, and if you don't, you're fired. Like, so the cops rob way more people, steal way more property than anybody else, and resisting them is way more difficult. And so for anybody to feel safer because a mere human being, stranger that they don't know, with a gun, has a badge and a uniform and permission to be a control-free butthead and a giant gang behind them, it's just so silly. And more people are learning that the hard way. And thanks to cell phones and cameras everywhere, lots of the world is learning the hard way. Wow, these are just people, and they're not stable. You know, generally speaking, they're not any more stable than the rest of society. They're not any more intelligent than the rest of society. You know, how many jobs do you know that actually require you to be a certain amount of stupid? And if you think I'm making that up, look up the stories about how some police departments have upper-end IQs. If your IQ is above a certain thing, they won't hire you. I'm not kidding. Look it up. So how many jobs? Oh, sorry, you're too smart. Get out of here. So the cop, he's just a person to begin with. He's a stranger. He's probably not that more intelligent than the average person out there, and the average person is not that intelligent. He's probably not any nicer. He's probably not any more self-restrained. He's probably So when you see a video of, like, some cop just, you know, the girl probably said something to him that like, you know, called him a pig or something. I don't know. They're not that at all justifies. I'm trying to guess why he just decided to punch this girl in the face. She didn't assault him at all. Probably just a short-tempered, power-happy asshole. And he happened to have a badge and a uniform, which makes him way more dangerous. As demonstrated by the fact that after beating the crap out of her, the first thing they did was kidnap her and charge her with assaulting a public servant. And then the video comes out that shows, no, her crime was you just beating the crap out of her when she hadn't done anything to you. But, so they're just people. And if, you know, one of the things I'm thinking of sticking this into the sequel to The Iron Web, is people sneak microphones and cameras into cop cars illegally, because if the average person could hear and see what a lot of cops do on a daily basis, they'd see, wow, not only are these just people, they're not any more trustworthy, they're not any more self-controlled or responsible, they're psychos. In fact, with the whole steroid thing that so many cops are on, and looking for a fight that so many cops do, just they're way less trustworthy than just the average person you're going to meet in the street. And so there's that. I'll move on to one thing, and then I'll back up and go into the comments and see if I can keep up. So there's that. There's cops. Why the hell would you trust them? Now, the only way you could possibly make the situation worse is put them in a scenario where they can all the way commit murder. There's very likely to be no record of it, and it's almost certain that nothing is going to happen to them if they all the way commit mass murder. That is the description of the U.S. military. You give these people who don't even have to be qualified to the degree to be a cop, you give them a machine gun, you stick them on the other side of the world, you tell them to boss people around, they assault people, they commit extortion and rape and torture and murder, and what's the likelihood that anybody's going to care or anybody's going to know about it, other than their victims, of course, and then their family members and stuff? And so, and this is a thing I pointed out before, that, okay, if you're on the other side of the world killing people for politicians, we'll give you a machine gun. But if that same person comes back to the U.S., you can't be trusted to have a gun, especially if you're acting on your own. If you're using your own conscience, hell no, we don't want you to have the ability to use deadly force. But if you're blindly following the orders of politicians to kill people on the other side of the planet, oh, have at it. Well, not only will we give you a machine gun, we'll give you a freaking tank, a bomber, and all sorts of stuff to blow people up, because then we don't give a crap. To expect, and you know, from the segment of society that's responsible for most of the violent crime, which is young men. And there are women in the military, but still mostly men. And so a whole bunch of young men, heavily armed, in a place where there's almost no responsibility for their actions. They're told to be violent. Like, they're the worst, you know, as far as statistics are concerned, they're the worst segment of society to begin with when it comes to violence. And they know that they can do almost anything and get away with it. Often they're encouraged to be sadistic bastards, to show them who's boss and stuff, and the whole indoctrination and demonize and dehumanize the enemy. You know, all these things add up to, of course they're going to commit murder, of course they're going to terrorize people and torment people and do evil crap. And the idea that, oh, people, you assume that a soldier, oh, that's so noble and worthy and he's fighting for... Why the hell would you assume that about somebody who's a stranger just because he went and joined the military? You know how low the threshold is to get let into the military? There almost isn't one. It's what people do who can't figure out anything productive to do, is they go into the military. So you get a bunch of dumb, violent, you know, young men, and it's not only them, but there's a lot of them that join the military. You give them a gun, you send them to the other side of the world, you tell them to boss people around and occasionally kill people, and they know damn well that there's almost never going to be a situation in which something bad is going to happen to them because they all the way commit murder. If it happens to get caught on video, that's one thing, but how many Iraqis carry cell phones and camcorders compared to Americans? You know, I know some of them do, but in friggin' Syria, I kind of doubt it's less than in the U.S., so the likelihood that this segment of society, that's just strangers, they're just average people, they didn't take a magical goodness pill to get into the military. If anything, they took the exact opposite. And yet people assume that those in the military deserve respect and that they should be believed before other people. They and cops should absolutely be disbelieved before almost anybody else and distrusted before almost anybody else, because they're in a position where they have this authority that makes it so, A, they can do evil crap, and they're even supposed to do a certain amount of evil crap, and the stuff they're not technically supposed to do, they're almost certainly going to be able to get away with in the vast majority of cases. And to look to them to be a calming influence on society and to protect you from the bad people out there is just so obviously stupid. Before you even see a single story, before you know any of the specifics or any of the details or anything, to expect the cops and soldiers to be good people doing good things is just stupid. If you understand the situation they're in, and if you understand what the belief in authority does to people, you make people into monsters, and then you tell everybody else that we should worship and adore them. And then you wonder why, oh, these horrible things happen, and then they come back and they're suicidal, or they don't fit into society because they're violent psychos, and they, you know, beat up their partners and all the nasty things they do. So it's so weird that, well, you put on a uniform, now you're this magical thing that we think is good for some reason, even though without it, you'd just be somebody in a segment of society that we probably wouldn't trust that much. But now we magically trust you because you qualified to get a badge and a uniform, which takes almost nothing. So, just thought I'd randomly rant that. Now I'm going to see if I can back up and read some of these comments. It tends to do the thing where the comments go flying off the page. Yeah, don't forget unlimited stolen funding. So they're not even just beating you up with their stuff. They get paid day in and day out to beat people up and boss people around. They don't need to do anything productive to get a customer to willingly pay them. They just rob people, and they drive around in cars that their victims paid for, and they carry guns that their victims paid for, and they have their buddies whose salaries their victims paid for. So that's just to think that to expect them to be better than the average person. Like, if I'm walking down a dark alley late at night, the last stereotype of person in the world I want to meet is somebody with a badge and a uniform. Literally, I would rather meet anybody before any other segment of society before somebody with a badge with a uniform. But people still think, well, it's fewer and fewer people, because more and more people are either experiencing it themselves or seeing videos of what cops actually do in real life. Don't escalate against empowered armed psychopaths with permission to kill you. Yeah, on a practical basis, it's a fairly bad idea. Somebody correcting the spelling. I don't care. Half my mail gets my names backwards and stuff, but I don't get offended by people misspelling my name. Yeah, absolutely. They don't want smart cops because they might not listen, and that totally is the actual reason they don't. And their excuse for, like, well, this, if you're too smart, if your IQ is too high, this job might not be, like, stimulating enough for you. And no, what they mean is you might actually think about stuff and figure out, wow, this is ridiculous and evil, and I'm going to not only quit and run away, but I'm going to tell people what's going on. Whereas the people, this will offend some people, but guess whether I give a crap. The people who most gravitate towards being in a gang are people who, on their own, feel insufficient and insecure and weak and stupid and like they join a gang to feel like something important because by themselves they don't. And it doesn't have to be stupid. It can just be uneducated and they have no skills and they don't have an education. It's like, well, I don't know how to make any money and I feel weak. And especially if they, live in a dangerous neighborhood or something. And so they feel vulnerable. And so they join a gang. And it isn't always they, join the gang to go do nasty stuff. Sometimes it's they join up because they feel insecure. But then you have a gang of young men who's like, oh, look how strong we are now, and we're uneducated and unskilled and sort of obnoxious and whatever else. What do you think is going to happen? And giving them badges and uniforms isn't going to make that not happen. It's going to make it happen even more because they know they can get away with way more. And there was another story recently. I mean, there's an infinite number of these. I don't know why I bother to mention any single one anymore, where a cop was caught drunk driving and swerving around at a bazillion miles an hour, and they just let him go. And the other cops were hoping that nobody would notice, but it came out in the records or on video or something that you're swerving around like a psycho, but go ahead. And we'll let you get back in your car and drive drunk some more. The fact that anybody still trusts them, like they really do, most people really do view them as if they're something other than people. Like, well, now he's not a guy. He's not just a guy. If he was a guy with a gun, I'd go, But no, he has a uniform, so he's this magical thing. And I know people before have joked about, well, maybe they've done it, I don't know, joked about calling 911 and saying, there's a man with a gun in here, referring to the cop. Because that's all he is. He's a man with a gun. Only, it's not even that good. He's a man with a gun who thinks he has the right to rule, which is way worse than a random stranger. If I see a random stranger with a gun, I don't even care. Like, and partly this is cultural. A lot of people grew up where, there aren't normal people don't have guns. And in Hollywood, they see the only people who have guns is law enforcement and the bad guys. So people sort of get scared of them because there's always an association to that. And I grew up that way. I didn't grow up in the gun culture, but then I was around it and have been around it a lot. And now I see random strangers carrying guns. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. Unless they have a badge and a uniform, because then I immediately know he thinks he has the right to boss me and everybody else around. That makes him scary. That immediately makes him a threat to me and everybody around. And it makes it way more dangerous to resist him or try to stop him if he's a violent bastard, which they often are. So they're more likely to be a violent bastard, and it's less likely you're going to be able to do anything about it without getting caged or shot. Yeah, somebody mentioned hiring combat veterans. So you take the second scenario, which is the worst scenario possible, and they come home and they're all messed up, having been trained to be violent and inhuman, and then you say, oh, welcome home, have a badge and uniform, go boss people around. And by the way, make sure you steal a certain amount of money. You issue a certain amount of tickets in the next month. Like, what do you think is going to happen? So, yeah, so they're combat trained, and, like, that's really the people who were spending all their mind in the mentality of violent combat. That's who you want being peacekeepers, which, you know, hardly anybody even calls them that anymore because it would be so laughable. Oh, how do you, whoops. Comment ran away. Stephanie said, how do you personally make peace with your local community when police worship is an all-time high? I kind of don't. It's funny because I'll just blatantly say I don't nearly trust the police. They're just another street gang. And there's a number of people who go, oh, and I just go, like, you're allowed to freak out about that. I'm still going to say it. But then a lot of other people, and a growing number of people will go, yeah, they kind of are. So, and I never, like, I'm to the point where if somebody's horribly offended, I'll say, well, we can talk about it and I can prove it. I don't really care if you're offended. I'm going to say if they're a street gang, because what they do is drive around robbing people. Like, have you ever seen a cop saving a good guy from a bad guy? No. Have you seen them by the side of the road stealing people's money for having the wrong sticker on their car? Yes, constantly. You always see that all the time because that's what they actually do. And if somebody made a realistic cop show, it would be boring and infuriating because mostly you would see them fishing for reasons to steal money from people who didn't hurt anybody or threaten anybody. Oh, all right, let's scroll down. Yeah. And Amanda is here. And because... Yeah, and they come back, not only were they trained into combat, but they come out all traumatized and depressed when they figure out what they were doing over there was basically being terrorists. And some refuse to admit it to themselves, some admit it, and say, yeah, we weren't, like, I was guarding the poppy fields, or I was randomly harassing people I didn't know and kicking in their front doors. And that, you know, that majorly messes people up. And then they come home and you give them a gun and a badge and say, here, boss these people around. Like, how well do you think that's going to work? And I know, I've mentioned this before, but I know some former cops who were cops ages ago who say they can't stand cops now because they remember a time, and this may never have been true in big cities, but in smaller towns, they say, I remember a time when we were actually like peacekeepers, and our goal was to settle things down and to smooth things over and to, you know, keep everything quiet. We weren't like looking for excuses to arrest and fine people. They were pretty close to what would exist in a free society, not as law enforcers, but as there's a guy with a gun I can call if I feel like I'm being threatened, and they show up like threat management center up in Detroit. If anybody hasn't heard of that, look up the video and listen to their the founder, I forget his name. Sorry, I suck at names. Describing their philosophy, and it's exactly what should and would exist in a free society. Is a bunch of people with guns who know combat. They're really good at combat, and they're even better at making it so they never need to be good at combat. Like, they don't show up with, all right, who can I beat the crap out of? They show up with, how do we settle this down and calm things down and make it so no violence is necessary? I mean, if violence is necessary, we have the ability, we have the know-how, but we try not to do that. And that's not at all how cops function. They immediately escalate things. You know, sometimes, you know, like I started with, some teenage girl at a party, they escalated to her being punched in the face in the span of a tenth of a second. Well, good thing you called in the peacekeepers. They helped loads. Okay, somebody's saying sometimes it's the person behind the badge is okay, it's the job that's bad. Yes and no. I think a number of people join with good intentions, but you cannot, if the measure of a good person is behaving morally, You cannot be a good person and be a cop anymore. The job requires you to initiate violence in the name of whatever arbitrary whims that politicians decide to call law. So if you join up with good intentions and they say, all right, here are all the things you have to go rob people for and issue a ticket for that and threaten to cage that person for having the wrong plant and this, that, and the other thing, your choices are either stop being a good person or quit. If you keep being a cop and manage to not get fired, you can't be a good person anymore. You can have started with good intentions. So in one sense, yeah, the job is bad, but if somebody sticks with it, that requires the somebody to be bad, whatever their initial intentions were. And then there's immediately no reason to trust them. Yeah. Sorry, comments jumping around. Matthew saying, there's lots of people who've been who experienced police abuse firsthand, but they still support the police, and there's this mentality. Well, that's an exception. It's just it's a bad apple, and I won't go into that. I've talked about that a million times. Of how is it that all the good apples never do anything about the bad apples? And I point that out in videos, in police abuse videos. I point to, look at the other cops, and you can go do this. This is a mental or philosophical exercise, is watch a bunch of police abuse videos, but instead of focusing on whichever cop is beating the crap out of somebody, look at all the other cops. See if they, A, are doing anything to stop it, or B, look the slightest bit surprised at what's going on. Do they look like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my... Or they look like, oh yeah, Bubba's beating the crap out of somebody again. Hey, Bubba, can you kind of say, whatever, I have to back you up. Like, so where are these good apples? Because in these videos of the bad apples, how come they're surrounded by other apples that aren't doing anything to stop it and don't look at all surprised by what's going on? So, yeah. But yeah, like Matthew said, even people who are personally victimized think, well, that cop was bad. The police in general are... Like, how many individual examples do you need of getting beat up on before you stop saying the equivalent of, well, that gang member that committed assault and murder and extortion, he was bad, but the Bloods and Crips in general are good. And the funny thing is, I actually think that's more likely to be true, that there can be street gangs that are actually good and moral and legitimate. And I mean, I doubt it happens very often, but at least it's theoretically possible. I'm doing a Facebook Live, but you don't have to be particularly quiet or anything. So I wasn't talking to you, in case you couldn't guess it. But there can be gangs where it's just, a bunch of people are like, we're actually scared because of the scary violent gangs and we want to group together for self-defense. Cops are never that, because they're required to be law enforcers, which means literally if they only defended people from aggressors, they would get fired. If you're a cop and all you do is defend against actual aggressors, you're going to get fired because your job requires you to enforce every law. And the quotas are specifically about go rob people who didn't threaten or harm anybody because they drove 5 miles an hour over the speed limit, or they didn't have the right sticker, or their windows were tinted too much, or years ago I got to sit in a New Jersey frickin' courtroom about the tree that I took down, which I beat. They had to throw the case out. But I can't even count how many cases there were of tinted windows where they're doing this conveyor belt of robbing people because the windows, you couldn't quite see through them enough. Like, wow. So that's a reason to kidnap and rob somebody. Lovely. So they're constantly just fishing for reasons to rob people. And it's possible, I don't know how likely, but it's possible for an average street gang to not do that, to mostly mind their own business and actually sort of benefit their neighborhood. Not that I think most of them do, but at least it's theoretically possible, whereas it's not possible for law enforcers to just be defensive because their job requires them to be offensive and aggressive. Les says, a good cop has a backseat full of cops. Yep, and then immediately he's fired, and it was Josie made the point that she wants more bad cops, because a bad cop means one who doesn't do what the other cops expect. A bad cop is one who arrests the other cops when they do evil crap. But that hardly ever happens, and when it does, they immediately get vilified, and they get death threats, and they get everything else because they've gone against the street gang. Yeehaw. Yeah, and Jim brings up the thing of the, if there's 3 cops beating somebody up and 9 standing around watching, those 9 are support. Even if they're like, well, I didn't hit anybody, you also didn't stop it, and you obviously created a deterrent to anybody resisting. So if somebody says, well, if to get out of here I have to shoot all 12, I think that's completely justified. It probably won't go well on a practical basis, but I think it's completely justified if you have to resist the 3 that are attacking you and the 9 that are spectating, because it's a safe assumption that if you start resisting, those 9 spectators with badges are going to become aggressors too. And so, but in so many of those videos, the cowardly thugs watching are an indication of what cops are actually like. You can't pretend it's a few bad apples when all the other apples just stand there and watch. At best, they stand there and watch. At worst, they join in the evil crap. And let's see. Yeah, Matthew mentioning the thing that there are things that most people realize, like, well, if the cop's doing this, if anyone else did that, that's totally and obviously wrong and immoral, but it's a cop, so it's okay, and you should go along with it, and you should cooperate, and, all the memes of why don't you, instead of saying, fuck the police, why don't you just obey the law? And there's memes of, like, Nazis harassing a Jew, or, Jesus being nailed to the cross. Why don't you just obey the law? But that mentality that cops are allowed to do things that normal people aren't, that's one of the reasons they're so freaking untrustworthy, and you shouldn't nearly feel safe around them, because they basically have societal permission to be violent aggressors. Let's see. So that might be enough of a rant. I'll sort of skim along and see if anything else jumps out at me. I don't know if I'll nearly be able to catch up. Whoops, my computer is now freaking out. So, but that's the general point. And it's, as more and more videos come out, it'll be harder and harder for people to for more people to ignore the reality of what these people are. And they're just people, only they're not even just average people. Cops and soldiers, they're average people that now have every incentive to be way worse than average people. And way more violent and dangerous, and soldiers especially. So it's funny because, and I don't know why this is, maybe I'll have to ponder it and then do another rant about it. But I know a lot of former soldiers who are now anarchists. I only know a few former cops who are now anarchists, which is weird because to me, being a soldier is several steps worse and less responsible. And it's, a whole lot higher percentage of soldiers have actually committed murder than cops. Most cops just sort of run around robbing people. Most cops don't even draw their firearm, I think, in their whole career. They just pull people over and steal a little bit of money from them. Whereas soldiers are sort of, way more of them, if they've seen combat, they've threatened or shot at people and stuff like that. So to see more of them give it up, maybe it's because the violence and the evil there is so blatant that more people go, wait, what are we doing? This is horrendous, and that makes it easier for them to doubt it. I don't know. But I do see a lot more former soldiers becoming anarchists than former cops. Although I do know some former cops too. There's a former soldier. Oh, hey, it's Paula. She was at a Candles in the Dark thing. Oh, speaking of which, why didn't I mention that? The Candles in the Dark for New Hampshire is now set for I think it's July, I'm totally going to get this wrong. No, July 15th and 16th. in Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire, which is, I think, it's just south or just southeast of Keene, New Hampshire. So if you go to larkinrose.com and go to the store, you'll see the seminars listed there. And I hope in the next day or two I will be listing and the one in Denver, Colorado, you can already get. Oh, sorry. I'm a scatterbrain right now. The one in New Hampshire isn't on the website yet, but it has been confirmed. The one in Denver, Colorado, you can get Denver, Colorado in September. You can already get tickets for the one in New Hampshire and the one in Pennsylvania and the one in Washington State. Should all be announced and for sale in the next day or two because they're all lined up now. Just need to double check and confirm some things, and then that'll be going. Can't remember what brought that up. Oh, Paula mentioning that she used to be a soldier. Yeah, and there are a lot of them. I mean, I've lost count of how many people. And it may just be a numbers thing. Maybe there just are so many more people in the armed forces. Yeah, Jason saying that his dad was a cop for a bazillion years, for 20 years, and never had to draw his gun. That's true of most cops. Not true of most soldiers on the front line. But maybe it's just a numbers thing that so many more people are in the armed services. I'm not going to call them that. So many people are mercenaries of the state that just statistically more of them are likely to turn into anarchists. But it does seem that a lot can all the way shift over to seeing the stupidity down to its core, where cops don't seem to do that as often. Again, I know some who did, but it's not that many compared to soldiers, including Marines. Like, if you can go to the indoctrination process that they put Marines through, and still hang on to enough individuality and thought to turn into an anarchist, that's pretty dang impressive. Hey, here, oh no. It jumped away. Where'd it go? Oh, I found it. Larkin, former officer here. This is Paul. Took me a solid 8 years to realize that my profession was your oppression. Well put. Yeah, and it's because, if you're constantly surrounded, and that's the thing, and this is another topic. I'll just quick mention this. I'll have to do another thing about this. The whole topic, I was having a discussion with Amanda about this, the thing of when is it, ideally you want to talk to somebody's, the real them inside and appeal to their humanity and stuff. At some point, I don't at all mind resorting to shaming or guilting or threat. Like if there's a guy coming at me with an axe, I'm not going to appeal to his heart. I'm going to appeal to his not wanting to have his head blown off to stop him from doing that. But there's sort of the question of like, how long should you wait and how hard should you try to, connect with their humanity and stuff. And I think one of the reasons that it can be good, it can actually be helpful even for the cop, much less humanity in general, for them to feel even hatred. I don't think hatred's ever a good thing, but this is sort of a side benefit. If the cops feel hated by everybody, that may just make them, group tighter, but it may make them feel bad if they were good people, like, I'm trying to help, why does everybody hate me? But if, Paul, I think it was, who was a cop, and said it took him 8 years to figure it out. If you're not only surrounded by other cops saying, we're the good guys, but you're surrounded by victims and most of them go, rah, 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 thank you so much for being here, like, why would you ever doubt it? Like, if you're one of the king's guards and the people you oppress and rob go, we're so happy you're here, like, what's the incentive to ever question it? Whereas if everybody goes, you totally suck, we hate you, then at least you might, if you're a good person, you might have reason to think, why does everybody hate me? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. And that's one of the reasons why the turnover rate, why it's so hard for police departments to keep staffed and to find new people who want to be cops. One of the factors, and they've admitted this, one of the factors is that so many people hate cops that fewer and fewer people want to be them. It's sort of like the turnover rate at the IRS has always been ridiculous, because as soon as you're an IRS agent, everyone in the world pretty much hates you. So it stresses them out and they quit at an amazing rate. not a high enough rate, if you ask me. But obviously, ideally, I would rather have people, persuaded in a nice, understanding way to give up the violent aggression. But it's sort of undeniable that in some cases, shame and intimidation and guilt make some people go, I don't want to do this anymore because everybody hates me. And obviously, that's not the ideal solution. But I know some people that happened for, and it worked for. And oddly, for their own sake, I'm sort of glad that people were nasty enough that made them uncomfortable enough to think about it. And I've had former soldiers thank me for being as nasty as I was, which sounds weird, because they've told me, I'm not sure I ever would have questioned it if somebody wasn't all the way in my face saying, you're the terrorist, you're the violent psycho. And it's different for different people, and again, ideally, that's not how human beings would have to interact. And if there's a way to win people over while being gentle and rational and compassionate, that's cool. That's obviously preferable. Let's see. Somebody, I won't mention his name, somebody's in the National Guard and an anarchist. Incidentally, about 800,000 years ago, I took the entrance exam for being in the National Guard when I was a statist, obviously. And I did really well, and they said, oh, you can be anything. You could be a helicopter pilot. And I have no idea why. I was totally a pro-authoritarian. I was limited government, but I was totally an authoritarian statist. And so I thought, rah, rah, for the police and the military, and something in me just said, don't, for some reason. And I won't pretend it was anything wise or anything. I don't know why. I just, but I went to the process of taking the exam, and they said, yeah, I would really like to have you. And something in me said, no. Alrighty, so that Mitch saying, cop friend from high school, there's a war on cops. Guess who started it? Let's see. Robin asked about the Pennsylvania Candles in the Dark. It will, I'm pretty dang sure, almost totally sure, it'll be in Hatboro, Pennsylvania, which is suburbs of Philly, and it will be in July. I don't know exactly when yet, and that venue wasn't totally nailed down, but it was pretty dang close last I heard. So, let's see, there's tons of comments pouring in. I could go forever, but maybe I will just pipe down, because I covered enough. And so, yeah, there are some random thoughts. Oh, last thing, Mark says, come to Toronto. I'm actually trying to, and there's a good chance that I will at some point. So, that one isn't set. I don't know when that'll be yet. In the dead of winter up in Canada, so we can all die of frostbite in December. Thomas saying he's retired, active Army veteran, knows to experience how hard the indoctrination is to shed. Yeah, people love to imagine that in that situation I would do the right thing. So you don't freaking know. Had I gone through that indoctrination, I don't know if I ever would have become an anarchist or paid any attention to them. I don't know, because when you have your mind that molded into this insanity, and I've said this before, I'm not just kissing butt here, I've said this before, when somebody has gone through that level of indoctrination and manages to get out of it, that really freaking impresses me. I'm not sure I could have done that. And to have started that far behind and that programmed into authoritarian mindset and to still get out, that's pretty freaking impressive. So, alrighty, so it keeps piling on. Settle down, man. Mention the most dangerous superstition. Yeah, I do. It's so funny. I keep almost stopping. It's so funny how often, like, there's a bazillion people out there. It's a big-ass world. And And it's so funny how often I'll be talking to somebody and they're like, "You wrote a book?" And I have to remember, oh yeah, I'm randomly talking to random people in random places, and some of them have known me for 20 years and some of them have known me for 20 seconds. So yeah, I should sort of make it a point every once in a while to mention my books and videos and stuff. Yeah, I wrote a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition. And I also wrote a book called The Iron Web, which is currently out of print. The audiobook is available on larkinrose.com. The audiobook of The Most Dangerous Superstition is so close to being done. Somebody else did it for me, which is awesome, and there's one dumb little glitch. I send it in for review, and there's one stupid thing that has to be fixed, and I have to hurry and do that. So, yeah, but yes, for those who don't know, I do have a book called The Most Dangerous Superstition that you can find on Amazon or at larkinrose.com. And lots of people have told me it changed how they see the world and changed their life, which is pretty dang cool. It's by far the most important thing I've ever written. Probably will be the most important thing I ever write. Except maybe The Mirror, which isn't a book. It's a giant, weird, interactive thing. And if you look up Larkin Rose The Mirror, you can see a trailer for it, and you can see how to, if you want to support that, and me working on that, because that's a gigantically huge project, biggest project I've ever done in my entire life, and when it's done, I'm giving it away to the whole world for free. So it's not like, I'm going to cash in on this one for sure. I'm going to not cash in at all. So if anybody wants to fling money at me so I can work on it more, that's cool, because in the end, I'm unemployed with nothing to sell when I'm done The Mirror. Alright, so I guess that's about it. And tempting me, all we need to do is convince 7 billion people to be ANCAPs. Actually, that's totally going to happen. Because it's not convincing them of a philosophy, it's just showing them one lie that they need to give up. But maybe I'll do a different rant about that. Alrighty, so, Patreon. Yeah, Barbara reminds me. I do have a Patreon account, and I do such a bad job of promoting it that most of the people who know me don't even know it exists. I will put, I guess in the description of this, I'll go back and add a link to my Patreon account. So, yeah. Alrighty, so that's enough random ranting for now.
Coming up.
Awfully true, because everything really is warfare today, everything. And that's a topic I mentioned last week about eugenics. Awfully true, because everything really is warfare today, everything. And that's a topic I mentioned last week about eugenics, and the title was Genetics Must Lead to the Eugenics Czar, who will decide your fate if just below par. And par, of course, apart from being a sports term for certain sports and so on, and also like a level, you're either above or below the level, it also is used in eugenics and genetics for predictive, adaptive response. It's amazing, truly. This is part 2, as I say, but it's truly amazing that we can live through an agenda with so much documentation, now more than ever with the internet, on the system in which we happen to exist and how it's run, if you really want to know. Most of the studies that are shown by those who are monitoring us all the time, with the big universities involved, MIT and Facebook and all the different professional associations dissecting our thoughts, or are we following the correct memes and ideas which they put out? Are we all prattling about transgenderism and things like that, like it's supposed to be right now? Because it's across the board. Things don't happen by themselves. They don't. They happen because all media, the top media, which has always been a control mechanism for guiding us all, there's no guessing involved here. The big boys have published their own stuff back in the 30s onwards about controlling all thought by giving us our opinions. And of course that means restricting other kinds of thought or speech or whatever. And it's just the same today. When I was small, I think I've mentioned this before, the town I lived in had miners in it. And the miners, a lot of them were retired, for the ones that lived for very long, that is, because they all had different kind of bronchial lung diseases, which of course the authorities at that time always said didn't really exist, it wasn't proven. And of course they did prove it after they'd all died off and they closed the mines down, so that's standard stuff. They'll never prove anything or accept anything if they have to pay out on it, because we live in such a fair society. We're constantly told. But these miners, they play around during the day with themselves, each other, they chat away there with certain little groups, and you'd meet them in town crossroads, basically, corners and things like that, favourite spots. And they would chat, and what was amazing, if you're a youngster listening to that, them chatting, these guys who left school about 10 or 11 years of age were way, I use the term smarter, way smarter than we are today, because they understood the importance of the system which governed and ruled them and the techniques that it used. They knew the different owners of newspapers, their names, what their agendas were, etc., via their papers. Today, people seem to think like Brzezinski said they would, because they're trained to do so from the 70s and so on. Brzezinski said that people will eventually be unable to think for themselves. All they'll be able to do is to repeat the news that they get the previous night or previous day. And that truly is here today. There's no hardly a question asked about who owns the papers. There's hardly a question asked like what organizations the editors and owners belong to. And even the top shareholders. What are their views and opinions? What clubs do they belong to? The miners used to know these things because it's awfully important, as they knew, to understand. They knew because they were perfectly aware that all your opinions and information that you're allowed to have was given to you via the media of the day. I've read over the years on the air, in fact, of countless articles on this information age and the constant surveys that they've done to show that the more data they give us, the more confused we become. 99% of the data is rubbish. It always has been rubbish. It won't change or affect anything. Most data is trivia. And it literally is bubblegum for a few seconds of your mind or your time of the day. And nothing will come out of it for you, except you're wasting your life and being distracted and titillated generally, because most of it today is entertainment or it's about stars and stuff like that. Really. And we live in an age where everyone's taught that you're a star to put all your data up on Facebook and you can become a star, just like the reality shows and so on. And of course, monkey see, monkey do, and everyone emulates what they think they should be doing, just like the reality shows, mainly for the young, of course. It's rather amazing to see how simple and easy it is to control so many people. It's rather frightening in a sense, isn't it? But don't forget they've had lots of experience in managing populations down through the ages, long before even Machiavelli wrote The Prince. The knowledge of governing people and managing people is always accumulated for centuries and centuries. It's never discarded and tossed out. Nothing can become obsolete when it comes to successful techniques of controlling the minds of people and their time as well. Because if you control their time, then if they're chattering about irrelevant things, they're not going to be fomenting revolution or nasty comments about you. And that's how the rulers pretty well see it. We live in an incredible age, though, today. And TV was bad enough. It was just too easy to have people give up a good chunk of their life watching television. A good chunk. And so much advertising, of course, in between as well. Voluntary watching, something like 40 minutes of advertising a night when you add it all up. That's quite something, isn't it? Just to get a little bit of a laugh here and there, or whatever it happened to be, over a few hours. That was also mentioned in a pretty good movie as far as exposing that in it, called The Looker, an old movie. It's quite interesting too, of